Well, hey, we're going to look at Psalm 84 in a moment here. And are we going to be able to do that? Probably not? Okay. Okay. We weren't sure if we'd be able to because Jared's going back and forth. You know, he's got so as you can see. You will know that song. Better is one day with the Lord. You know the song. You've all sung it 500 times, right? So let's read Psalm 84 together. We'll read the left side. To the chief musician on an instrument of Gath, a psalm of the sons of Korah. How lovely is your tabernacle, O Lord of hosts. My soul longs, yes, even faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. Even the sparrow has found a home, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young. Even your altars, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God. Blessed are those who dwell in your house. They will still be praising you. Selah. Blessed is the man whose strength is in you, whose heart is set on pilgrimage. As they pass through the valley of Baca, they make it a spring. The rain also covers it with pools. They go from strength to strength. Each one appears before God in Zion. O Lord, God of hosts, hear my prayer. Give ear, O God of Jacob. Selah. O God, behold our shield, and look upon the face of your anointed. For a day in your courts is better than 1,000. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of wickedness. For the Lord God is a sun and a shield. The Lord will give grace and glory. No good thing will he withhold from those who walk uprightly. O Lord of hosts, blessed is the man who trusts in you. Today is actually the last, as it were, psalm that we're looking at in this sub-series within the Psalms. We'll look at another psalm next week that is written by the sons of Korah. I haven't picked that one yet, but that's what we're going to do. But this will be the 8th that we've done in this sub-series within the series on the Psalms. And these 8 psalms were picked because they gave opportunity for me to talk about Erik Erikson, a Jewish psychologist, and his stages of psychosocial development. And perhaps you haven't been here, and it's helpful to hear it again anyway. I like reminding myself of it. Stage 1 of life, he calls trust versus mistrust. And basically what he says is your first 18 months of life, if you're hungry, you're going to need, somebody's got to bring you the food because you can't get it yourself. If you're thirsty, somebody's got to give you something to drink because you can't get it yourself. If you're cold, somebody's got it because you can't do it yourself. And so your whole first 18 months of life is basically learning how much I can trust the world around me to take care of my needs. And there's no such thing as a person who's entirely trusting. If they are, they're too trusting, and then they're naive. And there's no such thing as a person who's entirely mistrusting. If they are, then they become very cynical. We're all on this continuum somewhere on the line. But we end up where we are, he says, based upon what happened in our lives in our first 18 months of life. Do we learn that we generally can trust the world around us or not? And I learned this principle. I realized when I was studying this that this guy actually, Erik Erikson, nailed it. Thomas, whose surname is Didymus. In the Bible, Didymus means twin. He was a twin. We have twin sons. And we noticed that when we were raising them, that our twin boys, if they said, Dad, would you do this? And I would say, yeah. And like 2 minutes later, they'd be like, Dad, you said you would take care of this. But if I said it to one of my other kids, they'd be like, they're gone. They trusted me. It could be tomorrow, the next day. Because twins, no matter how hard you try, they're going to have more often than not, they're going to have to wait longer to have that need met because you take care of one and then the other, and it's just a different place on the continuum. Same house, same parents, same values. You know, we could compare the twins to the one who was the older child or the one who was one younger, and it was just evident. And by the way, the twins are strong believers today, perhaps the strongest. But it definitely affects the way we live. And I realized this guy, Erik, he nailed it. Then we go from that stage to the next stage. Once I've learned that I can trust this world that I'm in, it's gonna work out. Once I've got that, the next stage in life is called autonomy versus shame and doubt. Autonomy. Am I an autonomous nation? Am I a self-governing nation? Am I able to take control over my own life? And or am I too ashamed to do that? And this is the terrible twos, where everybody learns how to say no. No, I'm not doing this, and no, because they're trying to become an autonomous person. And this is where we either learn that we can say no and we can become an individual and assert our individuality, or we're too ashamed to do it. And and if something really went wrong, really bad on stage one, then we'll have trouble with stage two. That's his point. And so these stages build. The next stage is initiative versus guilt. This is like the play stage. This is the first time in life when you start to have friends and you start to, you play with your little toys and you build things and your friends are outside the family and you begin to take initiative in life and you learn that you actually can do this. And play is really important because play becomes the foundation of all of our professional jobs. We play at our jobs. That's adult play, right? And so it's an important stage, and we learn this from 3 to 5 years old. It's really when we're learning how to assert ourselves. And then we come to this next stage of industry versus inferiority, where now that I know I can do this and I'll take some initiative, am I going to become an industrious person, or am I really feeling like I can't do this because I have an inferiority complex and I'll fail at anything I try? I've tried and I failed, and so, or every time I did try, somebody slapped me down, and so I learned, and this is the 5 to 12 part of life. And then we come into our teenage years, identity versus confusion. I'm beginning to really get a picture of who I am as a person, and this is why teenagers form these cliques. Well, Mom, Dad, everybody's doing it. I don't care what everybody else is doing. If everybody jumps off a bridge, are you going to jump off the bridge with them? But I'm part of a team. I'm part of this clique, and I don't, and my identity becomes so connected with the people around me. And so you'll see a group of teens that maybe they have all their pants hanging low, or they have weird hair, or they have this, or they have that, because they're part of this group and they're getting their identity from this group. And so it's a stage of psychosocial development. And once I've learned who I am, my identity, and I'm not confused about it, then I begin to realize, hey, I can actually build a relationship with somebody. And I come into this stage of intimacy versus isolation. I know who I am. I know the kind of person I want to get into an intimate relationship with. And that's and every person goes through these stages. Like everybody, there's you're just gonna go through them, and that's his point. Everybody has to do it. Doesn't matter when you live, doesn't matter where you live. You're gonna be 18 to 22. You're gonna be in that stage where your hormones are saying get married, and life says it, and so you're gonna do that, and then the next stage is generativity versus stagnation. Am I generating? And I want to really feel like I'm making a difference. Or am I stagnating? Am I stuck? And most young adults, this is the point in life where now that I know who I am and I have a relationship, I know the key relationship of my life, I now want to feel like I'm making a difference. When I was younger, I just wanted a job that made good money. Now I want a job that actually makes a difference, that I actually feel good about. That does young adult years of life, and we start to actually pursue things like that. And so once we've worked through that issue, we come to this later stage of life. And the later stage of life, basically what he says is age 55 and up or so. And all of these years now for these adults, it could be a little this way, a little that way, but basically 55 and up. And basically this is when you realize, hey, I got a lot more years behind me than I do in front of me. And there's no way to avoid that. That's just life. And recognizing that now, I begin to ask questions like, how have I done? How's my life? And you can't avoid it. When you're 20 years old, if you, God forbid, go through a divorce, it's horrible. But if you're 60 years old and it happens, it's entirely more devastating. You don't have the time to put it back together. If you're 30 years old and your kid curses at you, it's bad. But if you're 60 years old, if you're 70 years old, it's far more impactful because I don't have as much time. And so when I get older in life, the issues become more significant like this. And I begin to look back on my life, and I look for ways to make the pieces seem like they fit. And everybody's going to have broken pieces as part of their life. Everybody's got them. There's nobody in here who's Jesus. We all have these broken pieces. But in general, when we look back on our lives, if we feel like all the pieces seem to fit together, then I feel like a sense of warmth of my life. Life's pretty good. I feel like my life has had purpose. I feel a sense of warmth. I feel a sense of integrity. Now, when you think about integrity, think about the word integer. It's a whole number. So 1.5 is not an integer. 1 is an integer. 2 is an integer. 3 is an integer. 4.5 is not an integer. So it lacks integrity. Integrity is a word that really describes this idea of wholeness. And when I look back on my life, do I feel, do I see, do I sense, do I understand that God has given to me a sense of wholeness? And if I do, then I feel like I have integrity or warmth over my life. But if I look back on my life and I see this broken piece and this broken piece and this broken piece and nothing seems to be fitting, and I realize I'm 70, I'm 80, I'm 90 years old, and I don't have time to put it back together, then I begin to feel a sense of despair. Integrity versus despair. Now, it's never too late. We heard a great testimony from Michael about his grandparents getting saved. Because God can do this. I led my mother to the Lord when she was 82. That was, it was remarkable. It just remarkable. And so what happened was, let me back up to the series, to the stage before this, generativity versus stagnation. And I'm in my 40s. And I'm pastoring a church in Minnesota. And I'm not happy. I had been happy. The church was doing really good. But I was no longer happy. The church went from 160 people to basically 300-400 people in a town of 9,000 people at the time. So the church was doing well. Other than Easter or Christmas, it was the largest church in town. But I was no longer happy. So I called up the head of the denomination. And I said, Pastor, because he was my pastor, I said, I'm not happy like I used to be. I think I need a new church. Would you give me a recommendation? So he says, yeah. And we talked for a while. And I said, it could be as simple as I need to get a doctorate in Messianic leadership. But as far as I know, there are none in the world. Now, that was the last Friday of July in 2010. Back up, 1998. I'm sitting at a staff meeting at a previous church that I had worked with on staff. And the pastor, who's to this day like a father to me, he asks the staff, in a meeting, if you could go anywhere, if you could do anything, if money is no object and fire is no concern, where would you go and what would you do? That's like a Solomon question. Solomon, tell me one thing you want. When he came to me, I said, I'd go to Israel on an educational trip. So when that staff meeting was over, I went straight to the sanctuary, didn't go to my office. And I said, God, that just sounds like something you would ask. I think it was you. I'm there for an hour. I come out of the sanctuary. The pastor's waiting for me in the foyer. During that hour, not because of anything he did, surprise to him, surprise to me, somebody called a deacon, and the deacon called the pastor. And the person said, I want to pay for Donna and Greg to go to Israel, all expenses paid. So a couple weeks, I'm like blown away. A couple of weeks go by, I don't hear anything about the trip. I go see Pastor Mike. I said, I got to know, when am I going? He said, I don't know, I'll find out. He calls the deacon who calls the benefactor. This is Wilmer, our church. We went to church together there. So you're a living testimony to this whole story. So what happened was he says, I don't know, I'll find out. So he calls the deacon who calls the benefactor. And the answer we get is, tell Greg to pick whatever trip he wants, just don't spend a year there. I don't know how to pick a trip to Israel. I'd never been to Israel. This is my first trip. So we start to collect brochures. When I don't know how to pick, what's an educational trip to Israel look like? I don't have a clue. We ended up picking a trip. We selected the trip based upon the fact that it was being led by the head of the denomination. We thought that would be good for us. It would be educational, it would be everything about it. So, and there was even an add-on thing to go to Greece. We did that, and it was great. So that was the trip we went on. Now, today, I would not call that an educational trip. When I think of an educational trip, it was a great trip. It was educational. But it's not what I would do today, if you asked me for an education. Does that make sense? So I go on that trip, and before I go there, like a month before we go, we get called to this next church to become their lead pastor. And so I come back from this trip, we come back from this trip to Israel, and we're there for a month, and then we go take this new church. And that was 1999 when we leave. And it's going really well, and 2010 comes, and I'm not happy now all of a sudden. And in 2008, I preached 10 sermons on biblical feasts. In 2009, I got that's too much, Greg, right? And so in 2010, I'm just not happy. And so I said that last Friday of July, 2010. I said, maybe I just need another church, or maybe I just need to find there's a demon in Messianic leadership, but as far as I know, there are none. So at this time, my mother is living with us. Another demon. So my mother is living with us in Minnesota, in Minnesota, and so she's miserable in Minnesota. If you want to know why, just look the weather up today. Today. But that's not the only reason. She says, Greg, there's no Jewish people here. And there are none. There's 3 Jews in the whole city. I'm one. Another one got saved. And they came to the church, and the other one hated me. Really hated me. Stood outside the church with a big tag board sign one Sunday morning, because the lady who changed the sign in the church said, try Jesus. The sign said, try Jesus. If you don't like him, the devil will always take you back. So he stood outside the church with a sign that said, am I of the devil? Right? So there's no Jews in the city. And so my mom says, take me to Florida. I'm not staying here. So that's the last Friday in July 2010. We get in the car on Monday, first Monday in August 2010. And I'm driving with my mother to Florida. And the phone rings. And it's Ray Gannon, who I barely know, but he's the head of Jewish missions in that denomination. And he knows I'm Jewish. And he calls me up. I'm in the car with my mom taking her to Florida. And he says, Greg, Ray Gannon here. You probably don't know this about me, but I'm the guy that started the Israel College of the Bible. And I'm starting a D-Man in Messianic leadership It will be the first one in the history of the church world, and I'd like you to be a part of it. I just said this on Friday. This is Monday. So I said, well, Ray, this is like, wow. It's like shock. Wow, it's wonderful. I need to talk to my wife. He says, well, Greg, would it make a difference if I raise the money to pay for 100% of the first year of tuition for you and 50% of the second and third? I said, yeah, that would make a big difference. He said, I really think you need to do this. I'll pay for that. I said, Ray, why would you do that? You hardly know me, right? He said, and he gave me reasons. But then what happens is I go back to the church and they said, we love this idea. We'll pay the other half. So that meant that I got a doctorate in Messianic leadership without so much as the cost of buying a hamburger while I was taking the classes like back and forth and the plane rides and everything. Not a hamburger. So I said I would go to Israel on an educational tour. I got a free trip to Israel. Didn't cost us a hamburger. I got a doctorate in Messianic leadership. First person to graduate in the history of the church world with this. And I did graduate the top of the class. That is the truth. The guy who started it, Ray Gannon, says so. And my GPA says so. But now I got the education. I finished the degree, and a year later, Gateway calls me to do this. So they pay me to do this. They pay me. I would be scratching to do what I do if I was working for anybody else, to just get to do what I get, anything that I do now. Generativity versus stagnation. Am I generating? Do I feel like what I'm doing is making a difference? Versus am I stuck? You see that? And then so then my mom, I'm driving her to Florida, right? Literally on that day. I mean, I kind of jumped ahead. Let me go back to that car ride. Ray Gannon here. You probably don't know this about me, but I'm the guy that started the Israel College of the Bible. And hang up the phone. I said, Mom, your son's going to be a rabbi. What? All right, so we get to Florida. The day we arrive in Florida, her stuff arrives in a pod, and the next day we empty all of her pod stuff. You know what I mean? Like in the apartment, I load her stuff into the apartment. We had some guys help us do that. And one other thing, on the way down there in Georgia, just before Florida, there was a little piece of a truck tire that I ran over, just a little piece, like that big. It popped up on the bottom and it broke the air conditioner. And the car heated up and the windows heated up and fogged up and the car was a mess. We had to stop that night because the dog's in the back, right, her dog, and all of the breathing and the steam and the rain, and I can't see out the windows, and and so we had to stop for the night. So we get in the hotel room, and I'm not being very spiritual here, and I'm angry, and I prayed this. God, would you fix this air conditioner? I've seen you fix cars before. God, if you'll fix this air conditioner, I'll give you credit for it. I'll make sure that no demon in hell gets any credit for this. Now, here's the honest truth. I said that because my mom was watching me pray this out loud, and I didn't want her to say that my stepdad, her deceased husband, well, Howard fixed it from heaven. I didn't want her to say that. So I prayed that. I wasn't no fruit of the Spirit here, just a jerk, okay? So we get in the car, we only had 2 or 3 more hours to get there the next day because we were so close. We had to stop, right? So we get there. And the stuff arrives, and we load the stuff. and the air conditioner's not working. And oh, one other thing. Just before when we got back in the car, I thought, I wonder if this car is going to overheat because of the steam. It did. It overheated, right? And so we stop at a place, and while they're fixing that, I said, "Would you look at the air conditioner you see?" And he says, "Yeah, I couldn't see anything wrong with it. It's just not working." So we get there, we unload all the stuff out of the car, and that night, then we we're sitting at the night before that. So that night, the night we unload everything, and we got the beds and she's in her bed, and I'm sleeping in the living room on a mattress that goes under her bed. I pulled it out and put it in the living room. And at 2:30 in the morning, she comes out to me, wakes me up, and says, "What, Greg?" I said, "What, Mom? You woke me up." She said, "No, you said, you called my name. I heard you say it, Matilda."
Oh, wow.
I said, "Mom, you woke me up." She said, "But I heard you." I said, "No, Mom, I did not call. What? You woke me up, but I heard it." So she goes back to bed. The next day is going to be my last day because I'm going to leave at the end of that day to fly back. So we went out to eat. And so we're in the car, and I have the air conditioner just blowing hot air. It's on, it's blowing anything, right? And all of a sudden, it turns cold.
No.
It just turns cold like that, just on its own, right? So we go to this restaurant. I'm sitting at this restaurant with my mom, and I said, "Mom, who calls you Matilda?" Her name's Matilda. And she says, "That's what I can't figure out. Her name's Matilda." She said, "But in first grade, we had 3 Matildas, and the teacher said, we can't have 3 Matildas. So from now on, you're Matilda, you're Mickey, and you're something else." She said, "She called me Mickey, and my whole life, everybody's called me Mickey." I said, "I know, Mom." He said, "The only other person who called me anything else was my dad. He called me Toots, but I've never been called Matilda my entire life." I said, "That's what I'm saying. I would never have called you Matilda, ever." She said, "I can't figure that out." I said, "Mom, you know what I think happened here?" She said, "What?" Because I'm thinking of Samuel, God called him. I said, "I think God called your name in the middle of the night." And she's looking at me. I said, "You know why I think he did?" "Why?" "For the same reason I think he fixed your air conditioner. He doesn't want you to go to a hot hell." And we both started to bawl. So we go back to her apartment. I only have like an hour or so before we have to get to the airport. I said, "Mom, do you still have that Bible that our son Jeff gave her?" If anybody else in the world, any of other kids or anybody had ever given her a Bible, she would have thrown it out in the garbage. But the fact that it was Jeff, the Messiah, in her words, gave her that Bible. So I got it. So I open it up and I start to read to her. I said, "Well, Mom, you probably should read." I read Matthew. "You probably should read Matthew." Open it up and this person beget that person. That's probably not. Maybe not. So she said, "Oh, no, it must be important." So I said, I'm thinking, how do I help her realize it is important? So I took her to the Beatitudes, Matthew 5, and I started to read it, and I'm bawling. I can't read it without gag crying. And it's like I read like 3 words and gag crying, 3 words and gag crying, 3 words. And she's looking at me, right? I said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. This is like so important to me." But when my mom got saved, 82, when she was 86, just before 87, she's in the hospital. She's living with us again here in Texas. Literally, my first day here was February 16th, 2015. On March 7th, not 3 weeks later, she's in the hospital, and it's the last time that we'll see her alive. And I'm feeding her. I'm standing on the side of her bed, feeding her. My Donna's in the room with just the 3 of us. And my mom just turns from the side, looks straight in front of her, and says, "Jesus, would you take good care of my son? He's a good man." That's the last time I saw my mother alive. She was 82 when she got saved. She was 86 and a half when she went to be with the Lord. And I'm telling you, it doesn't matter how old you are. God can put the pieces together. I can tell you it doesn't matter how young you are, you can't. You can't. He can. And that is the truth. This psalm, for me, there we go. I'll go 10 minutes. This psalm I picked this psalm because this psalm describes a situation that I think fits the idea of a person really wanting to be around God, really wanting to be, as it were, in the house of God. I have an illustration in the notes that basically says something like this. We all know people who we went to their funeral and they had faith, but they never went to church. And somebody will feel obligated to say something like this. You know, they believed in God. They just didn't go to church. I've said that myself about people that we know and love. Because you feel obligated to say something like that to give people hope. And no doubt, we've all known people who've gone to heaven like that. We all know that. Compare that to the person, though, who has given their life to being connected to a church. That is an entirely different funeral. Nobody has to say anything like that. I'm thinking of Winnie from our last church. Nobody has to say anything like that. That person, they're in heaven, surer than I'm standing here right now. And you know it. And you've known people like that. And that's because of their connection with the house of God. And this psalm talks about the tremendous value of worshiping at the house of God. I put some things in here about Korah and the sons of Korah. We'll just skip that. And I also put some, that's on page 2 and 3, and skip, you'll notice on the instrument of Gath on page 3, that's actually from something I did with you when we did Psalm 8. I just literally copied that out, that little section on the instrument of Gath. But this is Psalm 84 in a nutshell. How lovely is your tabernacle. The first word, how, this sense of, how great is church? No, I'm is that my phone? No. I don't need to say that to this group. You're all coming on a Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock. But you know what I'm saying. I'm preaching to the choir here. Top of page 4. Psalms 84 expresses devotion to the temple, to the place of worship. God is praised through the things that belong to him. He's praised through his temple in verse 1. He's praised through the courtyards of the temple in verse 2. His praise is connected to the walls of the temple because birds nest in the walls. He's praised through the altars where his sacrifices are offered. He's praised in the places where people are congregating or dwelling in the temple in verse 4. He's praised because people are singing there. And God uniquely hears the prayers of his saints from that place. It's worth making a pilgrimage to that place, is the point that the psalm is making. Even though you're going to have to travel through some really dry valleys of Baca, even though it's going to be hard to make this pilgrimage, it's worth making the pilgrimage. And the difficult journey there, it's only going to make you stronger. Why do we need a place of worship? Isn't my body the temple of the Spirit? Absolutely. And you can see some support for that there. And then there's the corporate gathering, this idea that, well, the church is just wherever the people gather. Hey, the congregation of the faithful has always been where the people gather. But in spite of that, God still had a place where he wanted his people to come to. And the Lord is still going to return to the earth, put his feet down on a particular 2-foot section of a mountain on the earth, and that mountain will split under his feet. He will go into the city of Jerusalem. He will sit on the Temple Mount, and he will rule the world from the temple. It is a complete failure of theology to think that the place doesn't matter. Complete failure. The place matters. That doesn't mean you're not the temple. It just means God expects his people to come together. And in our last church, when we were brand new there, and there was a room that was the fellowship hall, the carpet was as old as the building, and I'm not exaggerating. It was as old as the building. It was in shreds. It was a tripping hazard. And one of the first things that we did was we used church money to fix that carpet. People got upset with us. You're wasting money. Let me tell you what we're doing. We're taking care of the place where we worship God, because as you take care of the place, when you pick up a piece of garbage off the floor, God sees that you're taking care of the place where you worship him. And make no mistake about it, he takes it personal. When you say, I'm going to go to that church, I don't want to go, but I'm going to go. I'm tired, I'm going to go. He takes that personal. It matters to him. It just matters to God. So I'm going to skip a lot of this. Down on the bottom of page 5, I put this little thing of the warrior God is in his temple. The phrase Lord of hosts in the middle of the page appears 4 times in the psalm. Literally, it means the Lord of the armies of heaven. Literally. That's what the word means. Lord of the armies of heaven. That's Adonai Tzavaot, or if you will, Jehovah Tzavaot. Adonai Tzavaot, if you will, Yahweh Tzavaot. The Lord of the armies of heaven. All the other names of God appear once, twice, 4 times, but that name, 245, and you could count it differently and get it much higher, but hundreds of times. The tithing, we tithe, Malachi chapter 3, to the Lord of hosts. He says, bring it into the storehouse. Notice in Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 25, you'll notice that word armory. It's the same word for storehouse. It's the place where he brings the weapons of his indignation out. The Lord of the armies of heaven says, when you bring your tithe into the Otsar, into the room in the temple, the location where you worship me, you bring your tithe in there. The Lord of the armies of heaven says, I will take out the weapons of my indignation, and I will fight the devourer on your behalf. I will attack Satan on your behalf when you bring your tithe into the place. Because the place matters. It matters to God. So we don't do it every time, but we do it often enough. We'll just think about, God, we just thank you for taking our tithe and using it to rebuke the enemy on the behalf of our children. And I don't have time to go into why I say children, but you've probably heard me talk about that. You could go back and listen to the Shabbat sermon from February of 2020, and I explain tithing, the holiday. I teach on Tu B'Shvat, a holiday. I'll just close on this thought. If you will, go to page 7, because I said I'd keep it short. This is the pilgrimage psalm. Okay, so it's David and the sons of Korah. The sons of Korah wrote this, not David. Someone is with David. A son of Korah is with David, and he's writing this. And he's not. Okay, well, I won't go there. So what happens is this guy is there with David, and he says, we are willing to traverse a desert to get to the temple, to get to the place of God. This is going to be hard to get there. So in Jewish thinking, this is probably while he's running from Saul. Kyle and Delich commentary says this is probably while he's running from Absalom. We don't know. But Jewish theology is also, this is connected to the autumn rains of this psalm, because he talks about God sending the rains, and so it's connected to the autumn rains, and if it's connected to the autumn rains, that would probably be the feast of Sukkot, which is connected with rain. So this is probably a psalm, no guarantee, but most likely a psalm connected to a pilgrimage feast the Feast of Sukkot, that was written during the difficult times of David's life. And it became connected to this pilgrimage psalm. Does that make sense? And so there's value in traversing a desert experience. Bottom of page 7. Rashbam offered this preaching thought in which he showed that the word Baca, the valley of Baca, is related to the Hebrew word for confused. And after being shrouded in darkness, man can truly appreciate light. After stumbling through the morass of Baca, confusion, a man can arrive at a clear, unfettered thought. The Talmud teaches that a man truly understands a subject only after he misinterprets it. And then he struggles to fully comprehend it. Therefore, the confusion may be transformed into a water spring of clear logic. And that word for confused is the same word for perplexed in Esther 3. So the rabbis are saying it's only after you have got it wrong and you didn't understand it that you finally come to the place where you can get this new level of understanding. Did you all hear Rick Warren's sermon this past week? When I read this by Rashbam, I thought, that's exactly what Rick Warren is saying. If you have not heard Rick Warren's sermon from last week, it was fantastic. It was just totally fantastic. I remember when I was working on my bachelor's degree, I thought I had a pretty good head on my shoulders. I knew a lot of things. By the time I got through with my master's, I thought, I don't know so much. By the time I got through with my doctorate, I don't know squat. I don't know anything. That's the truth. Jack Hayford, I've heard him personally. I have heard him in class. I was in a room with him, and I heard him say it. I have come to the place where I realize I am wrong more often than I am right. Jack Hayford. So, one final thought I'll do on page 9, just because I should probably put one more Talmudic thing in there. Notice, so only in this world can a man fulfill God's commandments and gain merits which will enrich the future reward in the world to come, when it's too late, because there is a time for reaping, and here it is a time for planting. So there is this Jewish theology that says it's better to be here. And obviously, it's better one day with the Lord than 1,000 elsewhere, and that's obvious what we mean by that. But I'm saying, and I'm not in any way saying that's not completely, but there's another way. You know, there's like more than one way to read a verse. So another way to read it, and that is this: it's better to be alive in this world for one more day than it is to go to heaven today. Because as long as you're alive in this world for one more day, you have the opportunity to plant some seeds that you will not be able to plant when you get there. That will be the time of reaping. This is the time of planting. So there is a Jewish thought connected with Psalm 84 that says, take the one day here that you can. Does that make sense? So notice the Talmud. I gave you Makot 10a. So David, before the Holy One, said, blessed be he, the Lord of the world. I heard people say, when this man, old man, when is this old man going to die? People saying to David, when are you going to die? So your son can go ahead and build the temple for us. And David said, I rejoiced when I heard them say that. David was happy. I should have given you the next line in the Talmud. I realized I didn't do that. I said, I should have given them. Because the next line says, better for me, David says, is a single day, or God said to David, better for me is a single day on which you, David, are engaged in the Torah, more than 1,000 burnt offerings that your son Solomon will offer. God says to David, and then according to that Talmud, if it's true, who knows if it's true, but Jewish thinking, Jewish insights to Psalms. God saying, David, it's better for me that you be alive and study Torah, study the scripture one more day, than 1,000 burnt offerings that your son will offer from that temple. One day. One day. Take it. Take it. Praise God. Well, the Lord is good.